When did you meet Jean Oser?
Well, I met Jean when he came back from Ottawa. I know he had been living here in the 70s and I think into the 80s, and then I guess it was the late 80s that he came back to Regina.
Yeah.
And he started teaching classes at the University of Regina, so I met him there as a professor, and then, of course, out around in Regina, as you know, all of us did at film events and at the RPL Film Theatre.
Right. And is there something that you remember about him?
Well, I mean, the main thing about Jean really was obviously his passion for cinema. Like, this was clearly his calling. It was something he had dedicated his life to, and that was something that was really infectious to anybody, I think, who knew him. And obviously he inspired lots of people in filmmaking, and that was why. It was just this sort of unending passion for it. He never got tired of it, and he would always go and see new films at the RPL Film Theatre. You know, he wasn't stuck in the past in that way either. He had obviously a great passion for the history of cinema, but it never left him. And of course they gave him a lifetime pass at the RPL, so he could just cut whatever he wanted, and he did.
The good life, yeah. Is there a particular story you remember about Jean?
Well, it was always great to hear Jean tell stories, but the one I think I remember the most is when he talked about King Kong. The original King Kong from 1933, an American film. But in the 1930s, Jean was living in Paris, and one of his jobs was to supervise the French translations of various films. So at some point, he was given the job of supervising the French translation of King Kong. And just that in itself was mind-blowing to me, that you know, he had this connection to it. But then he went on to explain that back in those days, you didn't just translate the dialogue and do a dubbed version. You would sometimes recut the film. Like, they would give you your own kind of, you know, duplicate negative to every country, and you would translate it, and you would sometimes recut the film. And so he said that there's a plot line in the original King Kong where the Fay Ray character is a thief. She steals something early in the film, and I don't quite remember the details, but he said, "Oh, I cut that out. I thought it was silly. I cut that part out." And then he sort of regretted it years later, because he realized what a classic King Kong was, and he was like, "I can't believe it. I screwed up King Kong." And it was his version of King Kong that was seen in France up until, I think, the 1970s, because, you know, once it was translated into French, they just, you know, kept making copies of it from there. So it was Jean's version of King Kong for many, many years in France.
That's a great story. I love that one.
It's amazing, yeah.